You got a haircut, Anthony.
I got a haircut. I did. I got a haircut. I feel so much better. Thank you for joining us this morning. John is remarking on my wonderful haircut. I needed it a little bit. And it's a special day indeed, because we had an incredible court case come out last week on that has blown me away. Because I got to tell you something. This is what I did for my firm. If you guys have been following this channel, there's something called a beneficial ownership information report. And it's a new law. It's a new reporting requirement that requires people to report their beneficial ownership information in pretty much any limited liability company, something created by a Secretary of State. An incredibly aggressive move by the government's part. And it was passed as part of the Corporate Transparency Act, right? Because, big corporations are big and scary. So that's why the government needs to make sure that if your son has an LLC for his lawn mowing business, that he reports that. Now, the thing about this law is it passed last year, and then it came up, and the penalties for not filing, it's like the FBAR. And if you're watching this channel, you're probably pretty well versed on what the FBAR is, the report of financial accounts. It imposes a $10,000 penalty for not filing. And so it's the same sort of trap. Is there really any reason the government needs to have this form? Well, according to the government, it's to fight terrorism. That's right. Any LLC that anyone has anywhere in the United States in any jurisdiction is presumptively used for terrorism. And that's why this was required, so that we can be safe. And be subjected for $10,000 fines per year, and up to more if we do other people's forms incorrectly. Now, the thing that now this is how serious I was about it. I actually created an entire sales process. Here you go. To go to irismedic.com.BOIR so that we could file your BOIR for you. This wonderful form that has nothing to do with your taxes. It's just a massive data collection by our government, who knows better than us. Now, here is the shocking thing. This was actually a government power that a court had a problem with. This was a case was brought. Let me just pull up let me just share my screen with you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. This case was brought up. This is the case it is. I'm going to go I'm going to go down to the bottom after I go to the top here. Explain what this is. This is the case that just came out. National Small Business United, doing business as the National Small Business Association et al. Those are the plaintiffs versus Janet Yellen in her official capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. So she was sued. And in the Northern District of Alabama, Northeastern Division. And then the most shocking thing that I could possibly find is a court actually found that there were limits to federal power. That is, our U.S. federal Constitution, which grants limited power to the federal government. A federal judge says, yes, it is a limited power, because look at this decision. This is amazing. This is amazing at this decision. We go right down to the bottom. Conclusion. The Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional because it cannot be justified as an exercise of Congress's enumerated powers. This conclusion makes it unnecessary to decide whether the Corporate Transparency Act violates the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. And so with that, kind of interesting here, you would think that that would be spell curtains for the BOIR, but the government did just file an appeal yesterday. They're going to appeal to the First Circuit. Here's the appeal they filed yesterday, March 11th, and here's their notice of appeal. Now, what's interesting too is that this is what they put on their website. This is the government's characterization of the decision. And it's kind of interesting here, and it's in pure government fashion too. On March 1st, 2024, in the case of National Small Business United versus Yellen, a federal district court in the Northern District of Alabama, Northeastern Division, entered a final declaratory judgment concluding that the Corporate Transparency Act exceeds the Constitution's limits on Congress's powers and enjoining the Department of Treasury and FinCEN from enforcing the Corporate Transparency Act against the plaintiffs. The Justice Department, on behalf of the Department of Treasury, filed a notice of appeal on March 11th, right? And I just showed you guys that. While this litigation is pending, FinCEN will continue to implement the Corporate Transparency Act as required by Congress while complying with the court's order. Other than the particular individuals and entities subject to the court's injunction as specified below, reporting companies are still required to comply with the law and file a beneficial ownership reports as provided in FinCEN's regulations. FinCEN is complying with the court's order and will continue to comply with the court's order for as long as it remains in effect. As a result, the government is not currently enforcing the Corporate Transparency Act against the plaintiffs in this action. Isaac Winkles, reporting companies for which Isaac Winkles is the beneficial owner or applicant, the National Small Business Association, and members of the National Small Business Association as of March 1st, 2024. That means if you join now, they're not going to go against you. Those individuals and entities are not required to file a beneficial ownership information to the FinCEN at this time. So kind of a pretty bold decision by the government here, John, and I kind of want to get your opinion on this before we take a deeper dive into this, because I look at the court's decision here. Again, it says the Corporate Transparency Act is unconstitutional because it cannot be justified as an exercise of Congress's enumerated powers. This conclusion makes it unnecessary to decide whether the CTA violates the First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. And I'm looking at the decision, and I read through this. I was trying to find something where the court's decision was only effective against the actual plaintiffs and not the entire Corporate Transparency Act. But if we notice what FinCEN characterizes this as, they're like, oh, no, the judge's decision was just against these plaintiffs. Everybody else still has to file it. You better file it. And I suppose if you want to file it, you can still file it. They're still doing it. But to me, John, help me out here. Does this seem like our government is inventing what this decision is while it's under appeal? Does this seem, to me, as I read this, it just seems a little bit not quite what the court said. Do you agree, John?
I skimmed the decision this morning. Go right to the bottom. Go right to the bottom.
Yeah.
Right.
So here it is. Right. There we go.
Yeah. So there may be another part of it. There is a part of it that says that that could be interpreted to mean, I think disingenuously, but could be interpreted to mean that it applies only to the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. However, the whole thing is completely idiotic because,
right,
obviously, if it's beyond the power of Congress to do this,
right,
then anybody who they go after can just raise the same, use this decision as a defense. So what they're really saying is, well, okay, we don't agree with the decision, but we'll respect the decision insofar as it would apply to the people who brought the lawsuit. But, our view is it doesn't apply to anybody else. That's essentially what they're doing.
Yeah.
Now that's confusing the issue of compliance and enforcement, right, with the issue of constitutionality. All right. So part of the problem with this is that as much as it pains me to say this, I think that the government is very likely to win on the appeal.
Okay.
For reasons that, we can perhaps discuss.
Yeah, we'll get into those. Yeah.
But, it's ridiculous. Okay. It's ridiculous. And it shows you, I think, also the extent of the maliciousness and pure evil of the government. Right. Say, well, basically, this particular group of people might have stopped us for now. And so we won't go after that group. But anybody else who wasn't a party to this lawsuit, well, look out. We're coming after you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and I think the word evil is absolutely right. That it's evil every which way. The government is taking a power it doesn't have. And it's like, yeah, we're not going to listen to the court. We're going to do what we want to do because, look, we're evil. And we want to make sure that we have massive penalties to terrorize people with, because that way we can have control. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, you know that with the FBAR penalties, that's exactly what the government does. They want to terrorize people with the threat of these penalties, penalties which are easy to assess because, again, the government doesn't have the brain power that it used to have. It's not that much fun to work at the government, to work with people like this. Could you imagine trying to work with people like this who really think that, oh yeah, the Constitution doesn't allow it, but we're going to go and do it anyway. And it's sort of, this is sort of one of the things
Right.
I was,
What it is, Anthony, is a statement from the Treasury Department that we absolutely will violate the constitutional
yeah,
rights of any American who doesn't
yeah,
take this to court specifically to defend himself.
yeah.
That's what it
That's
really
right.
is. Okay. I mean, look, it doesn't give me any great pleasure to say this. I'm sure there will people who find that to be offensive, but tell me what part of that statement is wrong.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. This is just so beyond, and this is so instructive. And I think this is such a great example of what our government actually is. Now, John, you sent me a video early this morning. Say, Anthony, I think this really reminds me
Yeah.
of Reagan's inaugural speech. And I was watching it. Unfortunately, I'll put the link in it. I can't get the audio to play. So let
Oh,
me just, here is the video. And if you want to, I'll put this in the super chat if you want to follow that link to there. And unfortunately, I play it. You're not going to hear the audio. I got to figure out
let me
my
tell you
setting.
why I thought this was, this is so important. I don't think about these podcasts with you, Anthony, until usually the morning of the podcast.
I love it.
Because I'm just, too
Yeah,
close.
I hear you. We got things going on, right?
Yeah, but I woke up thinking about this morning, and I started off by reading, all 53 god awful pages of the decision. And I realized that, I was reading the decision of, a judge who comes at this with a presumption that there are limitations on what government can do. Okay, and the judge deserves to be commended for that, and so should anybody else. Okay, imagine the thought, right, in America today, that there are constitutional limitations on what government can do. I mean, that's almost mind blowing, right?
Yeah.
I think particularly for people who are perhaps starting law school today. But it reminded me of Reagan's 1981 inaugural address, which, by the way, I would recommend that to all your listeners to watch 1, 2, 3, 10 times. Not only is it one of the finest, I mean, he didn't write it himself, obviously, but I mean, not only is it one of the finest, I think, in history, but it tells you a great deal about how the United States has evolved. And another point on that, another great thing to watch, to understand, to get ideas on this, presuming that you can't stand reading these court decisions, which I don't blame you, would be great movie came out last year about the life of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which sort of chronicles her years as a law student, etc. But the movie is called On the Basis of Sex, and it really has to do with the history of combating discrimination against women. But a theme, sort of a line that runs through the whole movie is a statement by constitutional law professor Freund, who said, well, the courts are not concerned with the weather of the day. They're concerned with the climate of the era. And what we're seeing here from Reagan's amazing statement, where in one sentence he summarizes the ideal up, where he says, I sent it in my email to you. We are a government we are a people that has a government, not the other way around. We are a people that has a government, not the other way around. So the climate, at least in theory at that time, was that there were limitations on what government could do, that they were confined, within the context of this case, these enumerated powers. And it seems to me, 45, almost 50 years later, the climate has definitely changed. Okay, the climate has changed from a presumption that Americans are a people who has a government, frankly, the other way around, from a presumption that it's a tyrannical government that owns its people. And the Corporate Transparency Act is an example of that. And I think it's one of the worst, most profound examples of it, because, my God, I mean, it can't even be justified based on anything that's foreign or, really tax evasion per se.
Oh, yeah, no, and yeah, I mean, I think the terrorism thing, they really put that in there. And now, because that is one of the, let me see if I can find that part here. the government said, well, look, this comes under our power to regulate, foreign affairs. Because, hey, look, international people can, open up these LLCs and commit terrorism. That is what actually one of their claims. They actually will say that with a straight face. And I think, John, you're really right. This is something that people might not know. And I'll just share a little experience from my law school days. And this was, 25 years ago. There was actually
what years roughly were you in law school, Anthony?
99 to 2002.
Okay.
So one of the things that actually comes up as a debate in law school is, where do rights come from? It actually comes up as a debate, and that you have two people who say, okay, well, rights are natural rights. They're just inherent from you. They're your right. And then the other school spot, it's like, well, the rights it's a positive. It's whatever the government grants you. And was actually, and it still is, an actual legitimate debate in law school. And the fact, the idea that the government grants you a right only requires you to never look at any of the history of the Constitution, never look at any of the text, look at nothing of the founding of it, look at none of the debates, look at none of the context, and basically ignore what was written down. In order to get that claim that, you know what it is, our federal government is all powerful, and that is who decides what rights we have. That is one of the most ridiculous claims ever. But those people who have been taking over, there's a group of people in our government who have been, and it's been a long time, look, the U.S. government is a way to get rich, and they are all in it together, and they create more powers, and they protect each other, and they say, oh, you want that power? We'll give it to you. Oh, give us this power? Okay, we'll give it to you. And so that is how we ended up with this situation where we have a government who has a people, and that government actually hates that people.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we are. I do want to get Keith's input on this one here to see if he's followed.
There, one about the decision in relation to the foreign affairs thing that is extremely interesting.
I'm sure you find that.
And apparently, the government raised the argument that beneficial ownership registries and the transparency and this sort of stuff was becoming the international standard. And, that fact, right, the adherence to international standards justify this under the foreign affairs thing. And what was very interesting was the judge responded by saying, somebody, paraphrasing here, no, you're wrong, okay? The fact that it's an international standard does not give the government somehow constitutional authority to do something they don't have the authority to do under the Constitution, right? And that's very, very interesting because, there's so much talk of, the OECD beneficial ownership registries and, that FATCA lawsuit in the UK, Jenny's lawsuit, had a real problem last week with a decision, okay? But in any case, the point here that the judge is making is that the fact that the rest of the world is moving towards this transparency stuff does not give the U.S. government the right to do this if it doesn't already have the right. Okay.
Well, John, I was thinking about that exact thought yesterday, and I was thinking about this. Like, with the Supreme Court. And the courts will often look to say, oh, well, this is how modern countries are doing it in Europe. The United States needs to follow what the other countries around the world are doing. We really can't be this weird sort of country with this. We need to follow the other countries. And that's what they'll say. But, there's one thing that they won't say. They won't say this. Oh, by the way, every other country in the world doesn't have citizenship-based taxation. So they pick and choose which ones they want to have.
Anthony, the U.S. government operates completely outside the framework of law. Okay, yeah. It does what it wants until somebody stops it. I mean, yesterday I was doing a podcast with Laura Snyder and Karen Alpert, and the point came up that in the 1967 decision of Forium, the Supreme
which
Court.
is in here, which is cited in here. I saw it. I was like, ah. I was like,
Riot Act saying they can't strip people of their citizenship. It took 20 years, before Congress responded in any meaningful way to that at all.
yeah.
So, this is the problem, right? That, the United States, and this is just an observation. I mean, it's not necessarily a criticism, but it's not a country that puts a high priority on individual rights at all. Okay.
No.
And I think that needs to be understood. And this, of course, is really rooted in privacy, right? Why should the government have the right to this information? And, then we talk about the climate versus the weather. Well, more than 100 years ago, we have Brandeis's classic article, The Right to Privacy, where he talks about privacy, being the ultimate and the fundamental human right from which everything else follows, right? So, here we are right now. And I think that, if I were to say that one of the primary purposes of governments around the world, particularly the United States, is to basically obliterate privacy. I mean, would anybody seriously disagree with that?
Well, John, and I would say this because that right to privacy is in the destruction of that is actually pretty fundamental to our tax regime that we have. That when we look at the right to privacy, and this is something I've been thinking. I thought about this for a long time. Probably after one of my first constitutional law classes. I was thinking to myself, this like, okay, I get it. Actually, this is from the history of the Bill of Rights class I took. It was an elective. It was there was a lot of reading. And so it actually went further than constitutional law. I was like, well, what does all this stuff mean? Constitutional law is basically you're learning about the Supreme Court. You're really not learning about the Constitution. You're learning about the Supreme Court because they're different. And this is what you're left with. It's like, okay, so the Articles of Confederation were no good for reasons we're not entirely sure. It could have been that George Washington performed a soft coup on the Articles of Confederation that actually had no problem, other than the Articles of Confederation didn't allow for the graft the U.S. Constitution did, because there wasn't that taxing power. There wasn't that power to regulate commerce. That was the biggest flaw of the Articles of Confederation to the people who wanted an incredibly powerful, strong federal government like Alexander Hamilton. So, okay, so they want a big, powerful government, but this is the issue, that all the power the federal government gets comes from the states, okay? And all the power states have come from the people. See, so the people have all the power, and the people can give away, okay, I have the right to do this. I have a right to keep myself safe. Therefore, I can form a government to create a police force. Okay, makes sense. You have a right to defend yourself. Yes, you can get together and come up with ideas. Now, when we talk about, let's talk about, do I have the right to go through my neighbor's crap to see how much money they make? Do I have the right to sneak into my neighbor's house, just like, hey, I want to see how much you make. I want to see what you have in your bank account. Do I have a right to go and subpoena their records and say, all right, they won't give it to me. I'm going to file a lawsuit. I'm going to file a lawsuit so I could see how much money my neighbor is making. And the answer is like, no, you can't do that. You don't have a right to invade someone else's privacy. So then if that's true, then how can I grant a right to the government to invade someone else's privacy? And the thing is, I can't. But the problem is the federal government wants that money and doesn't care about logic, reason, or fairness, or the Constitution. They want that money. And so this is what John and I have said, and Keith and I have said. The true Constitution of the United States of America is actually the tax code, because anytime there's a conflict between what the government wants of yours and what the Constitution is, that Constitution is like, nope, doesn't apply. Because you know what? We're talking about this thing called taxes. And when it comes to taxes, the Constitution really doesn't help us out there. So we're just going to go with it. Hey, because we need revenue and we might be paid by the same people. So we are going to go ahead and agree with that. And so I would agree that, in my long tangent there, John, yes, the right to privacy and the destruction of it, the complete destruction of it, has given this government the power to rule over us and to terrorize us. The BOIR is a logical extension. of what we have.
Well, this is very much the responsibility for this lies at the feet of the American people, who really don't value privacy. They don't see it as as what underpins fundamental rights. I don't even think Americans, frankly, believe in rights at all.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that, I mean, there are a lot of reasons for it. Okay, partly because they grow up, reciting every day all the
Exactly. I think that's a big thing. The conditioning, the programming, and a lot of the stuff I believed at one point till I was awakened. So
yeah, but I mean, a lot of this also. If you look at the difference, like why is the mindset in Europe different? Well, I think in large part because Europe lived very directly, through the consequences of the Second World War, right? I mean,
and first,
we in North America weren't looking out the window, seeing destruction, right? Um, and so I think that the European culture generally has a much better understanding of what happens when you give governments too much power, too much information. Um, Now, I'm not saying that that the things in Europe are necessarily better, but what I am saying is that I don't think that Americans as a whole value the things we're talking about, and that's and that's why they continually get away with this sort of stuff. Usually under the guise of some kind of societal fairness. I mean, if you watch President Biden's State of the Union address, which you probably did the other night, or you didn't. Well,
no.
I mean, I find these things very interesting. His constant going on about paying fair share, and
Of course, right.
it was simply unbelievable.
Yeah, and I mean the fair share argument is if you actually know how the tax code works. It's the
I
biggest
don't
joke in the world.
understand. What do you guys think fair share means? Because it's a term that's thrown out.
Right.
That it's trite. What does that mean?
It means somebody else should pay more tax, but
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. And you know what? And that brings me. You know what? I just want to highlight this comment from John Geeham. I hope that's not a Yale logo. Are you a New Haven, John? I see a Yale logo there. Sounds like England in the 1700s, punishment well in excess of the crime to encourage compliance. And John, we're so far beyond what England did. That's kind of what we are so conditioned to accept this garbage. We are a far, far worse position than England, whatever England did to the colonies. No comparison whatsoever. We are far, far worse situation. And there's reasons for that. And I think some of the reasons are that the Articles of Confederation were fine, but look, you went to Washington, D.C. to get rich. The purpose and the very purpose of our Constitution was this exactly right, Keith. It was to tax other people to pay for your things so you can hand it out to your buddies. And this is something I've mentioned many times. It's incredibly important. The first law ever signed into this country was the excise tax of 1791. And imagine yourself this, you are from Pennsylvania, and for years prior to 1791, you fought against the British for all of those reasons. For, hey, look, we're fighting for truth, liberty, and justice and the American way, and you sacrifice yourself. You don't even get paid. You might have gotten injured. You went through cold winters, fighting the British, running all over everywhere. Finally, you retire to Pennsylvania, and the next thing you know is that George Washington is leading 12,000 federal troops in Maryland into your town to enforce an excise tax on whiskey, which took a gallon of whiskey, made it, instead of $6 in those dollars, made it $9. And the problem is that whiskey is a currency out west in the rural parts of Pennsylvania. This law was specifically passed because it would harm these individuals. This is Alexander Hamilton saying, hey, Washington, let's go after those people, make them pay for all the things that we want to do, all of our infrastructure, which is just basically a euphemism for your to give money to your buddies. I was thinking about this the other day. George Washington walked by this street, right in front of me. Now my building wasn't here, but he walked right by here. He was traveling up to Boston. And I was thinking yesterday, I was like, well, what was he traveling up there for? And the answer was he was there to go get money. George Washington was traveling up to Boston, passed through the town of Wallingford, Connecticut, stayed at one of the houses that's now part of the Choate campus, and he was traveling there to get money. Now, that's the thing that we do know. We do know that he did that, but what we don't know is, what did he promise someone to get that money so that he could continue that war? That's the thing we don't know. We don't know what he promised. So that is where, and John's no longer at Yale. Good for you. No, I know, just kidding. So that is kind of what we have here. Getting a little, and I think this demonstrates where the bias Americans have, because we're conditioned to believe the bullshit that we've been told all these years. But nothing could be further from the truth. As soon as you look at the very first law this country passed, we run into problems that really, really disturbed the narrative. Now, Keith, did I answer, or do we answer your question? Do you have more to ask on that?
No, you answered it. You answered it. Bottom line.
Right on. All right.
Yeah, one of the things, Anthony, to comment on John Gaham. Well, we're not,
John. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, John, if I'm mispronouncing your name, but that causes me to have the following thought, right? So you look at something like the Corporate Transparency Act and penalties, right? And as always, there's a range of penalties. Interestingly, this does allow for somebody to get a jail sentence, pretty much. I wouldn't say at the discretion of the government, but the government would decide, what would be the appropriate penalty. Now, most people would say, oh, well, that's just for, the most egregious cases. I don't think that's the issue here. Leaving aside what the law requires, let's look at the penalty provisions for a minute. The problem with this is the very fact that the statute authorizes a penalty to that extreme, right? And, I would have to think that might raise additional constitutional considerations. Now, in this particular case, you'll notice at the end that the judge says, well, we're going to decide this on the basis of the enumeration of powers stuff. The government doesn't have the right to do this anyway, thereby avoiding other issues of, the constitutional Fourth Amendment, this sort of stuff, right? But I think that, this is very much a separate problem here. I mean, can you really have laws that give the federal government the authorization to even go down the road to going for penalties that are so fundamentally disproportionate, to what is going on here, right? And this is the, I think, very much the heart of the, the U.S. Shall we call it judicial system, court system? I don't know. I mean, so they charge all these outrageous things, and then people will plead guilty to something lesser, etc.
Right. Yep.
This is one more example of a much, much broader problem. And I think that the time has come for the people of America, and they might start with this election, if they can, making the decision of whether the government exists at their pleasure, that there are people that has a government, or, as Reagan said, they're going to accept that the U.S. government owns its people. That's what's going on here. And you can easily get distracted by looking at these, these individual skirmishes here or there. But that's the real issue. That's the real issue.
Yeah, I mean, look at these penalties. I mean, they're insane, right? I mean, this is really for not filing a form, that you can get a $500 per day civil penalty, up to $10,000 in 2 years in federal prison. Now, we do know how. Now, this is
that was a light sentence. I mean,
right. Well, right. No, and you can also look. There's other unknowing and unauthorized disclosure or use of a beneficial ownership. If you used a form by any person, well, hold on a second. Now we have a $250,000 fine. in 5 years in federal because you didn't file what? And then we have up to $500,000 in 10 years in federal prison. Now this is where we have, and I'll just have to say this: we are experts. This panel right here, we are experts on how FinCEN penalizes. So I know exactly who would be penalized by this. It is going to be the person who probably did nothing wrong, but has a decent amount of assets and might be near the end of death, that they're frail, fragile, maybe suffering from dementia. I know for a fact that those are the cases that our government is most interested in prosecuting. Now, would the government be interested in prosecuting a tax case, a tax evasion case against a wealthy family in, say, New York, who has billions of dollars and is evading taxes so obviously and criminally year after year, involving an entire family and multiple people? The answer is no. The answer is no, and I happen to know that for a fact. I know that for a fact. If you are wealthy in this country and you give the right donations, and look, we don't even need to look to Joe Biden. We don't even need to look to Joe Biden. There are far more other people, and those people, the most criminal people alive, get the benefit of our government because our government is criminal. If you are not a criminal, you are the one who is punished by all of this, and that's all I have is the entire history of FinCEN and what the government has been doing. Anything you disagree with me, Keith? Keith, do you think I'm wrong about how the IRS has been, how FinCEN has been assessing FBAR penalties? Do you believe that this is correct? Am I being a little dramatic, Keith?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess fortunately, I have not dealt with anybody who has had to address any type of penalties because of lack of FBAR filings. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it's terrible. But I guess I'm fortunate that way that nobody has come to me because they have been assessed anything because of not filing FBARs.
Yeah. Did you see it? Now, John, do you agree that I mean, you've been there, right? I mean, you better agree. Otherwise, I'm going to be embarrassed.
You haven't said anything I disagree with.
No, I don't disagree with you, Anthony. I
don't remember exactly the last thing you said, so I'll put it that way. But look, I think there's another aspect of this that we really ought to acknowledge and discuss. Okay. I mean, we agree that this is an egregious, outrageous law. I think we all agree with that. And frankly, I think that almost anybody, except somebody who works for the Treasury Department, would probably agree with that. Okay. Or a tax academic, would probably.
Oh, yeah. They would love it. Right. Tax academic. Oh, but gives me something to talk about. Yep.
Or anybody else who, doesn't necessarily connect with these laws, say, with the reality of how they might be applied. Right. But look, one of the things that was, again, most interesting, and of course, I knew this and you knew this and Keith knew this. We all knew this, right? But sometimes it's important for somebody to hit you over the head, right? Particularly me, because sometimes I forget things that are important, right? Okay. But, the judge makes the point that this is all part, came in as really a small part of a larger piece of legislation, 1,500 pages. And I think he says, I may be wrong on the exact numbers, but, it was like 21 pages of, 1,500 pages of legislation. So, what they did, and by the way, this comes from the one and only Carolyn Maloney, okay, that famous Democrat who was, heading the Americans Abroad caucus, right? Maybe she.
Oh yeah, she's done so much for Americans abroad.
Maybe this was to bring FBAR on her part, but look,
well, she was there, and she was there at the FACA hearing in 2017, and so she must have said, "Wait a second, we can penalize foreign bank accounts. We can penalize people for not doing this." Oh, well, this is the outrage, and I think her only outrage was that only applied to people with things offshore. So she's like, "Well, we need to bring the FBAR home."
Yeah.
We needed to bring it home, and that's really what happened here. I mean,
Well,
she's
all these people, who were at that hearing, etc. I mean, I hate to turn this into a partisan thing, but I think objectively, I mean, this stuff is loved by Democrats. Okay,
and I would say it is loved by Democrats, and then it's condoned by Republicans, which means the Republicans are just merely passive aggressive about loving it. They love it, but they don't want to be on record as loving it. They love it. They love this. They love it. They want to take it and just wipe it all over them. Oh, yes, this law, this gives us all the power to rule over people. And now we have favors that we can hand out to people to get insiders trading tips and just various donations and to be the center of attention, which our psychopaths want to be. Our psychopath self wants to be a part of. Our narcissistic self wants to be a part of. That's what this is. This gives power to narcissists. That's what this is. And that's why they all love it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. But look, here's, I think, an important point to think about, right? This also, I think, has lessons on how laws are made, period. I do not believe for a minute that if this Corporate Transparency Act had come in as a standalone proposed piece of legislation where people in Congress knew who they were signing, it is absolutely inconceivable to me that this could ever have been passed. Okay. So, I think that a lesson here, and I think this frankly ought to be an election issue. I mean, as I've said, I think that Keith and Anthony should be a ticket, president and vice president. You can.
I have an update on that. I'll let you know. I have an update.
The way that the laws are made is part of the problem here, right? Yeah. So, there are two places to get in, to legislate pure evil. One is the Internal Revenue Code.
Of course. Yep.
Presumptively.
Mm-hmm.
The second is, as one of these omnibus bills, with this fancy name that includes all these other things. I doubt that more than 10% of the Congress in the United States even knows about this. Yet
10% seems high. That seems high.
5, whatever. Certainly,
yes.
Certainly it wasn't read, considered, discussed. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So what we have is a political process, a legislative process that is specifically designed to, accepted to do, and operated for the purpose of legislating this absolute pure evil, which this is.
Pure evil.
I mean, there's no reasonable argument to the contrary because of the sweeping nature of it. I mean, you're telling me that somebody who's a Domino's pizza franchise is laundering money?
They could be,
For you, get this. I was thinking about this morning. This week, one of these Americans abroad outside the United States called me up and said, he was having trouble with the IRS. And he said, well, I've read in the Internal Revenue Code, there are these low-income tax clinics that exist. And, I would like to set up a low-income tax clinic for Americans abroad outside the United States. And, I've chatted with him for a few minutes, about this. But in any case, the way to do that would be to set up a U.S. corporation, right?
Mm-hmm.
501c. So even a low-income tax clinic, right, that's designed to help people comply with taxes would be subject to this nonsense.
Wait, I think nonprofits are exempted. I think nonprofits are. Yeah, because every nonprofit has to file a public 990. So nonprofits are exempted. Then also, large corporations are totally exempt from this too, right? Like, no, we're not gonna make our buddies have to do this, right? All their corporate interests that pay off and make all these laws. But this is where I think, John, when back to what
though, if it was outside the United States, it would be through the FBAR rules, right? So what if it has a bank account?
Well, John, this is, and I think it ties in because I think you have the exact right distinction in the topic for this podcast is like, are we a people with a government or a government with a people, right? And when I look at this, and I've looked at others' laws, as you go through these massive pages, these complicated laws. Look, I've met Carolyn Maloney. I met her, saw her in person. I got to tell you something. There is no way. She's kind of, I don't know how to say this nicely. I don't know how to say it nicely. So I'll have to just say it. She's a dingbat. She really is a dingbat. She doesn't know what's going on. So there is no possible way that she wrote this law. She couldn't write this law. So the question is, well, then who did write this law? Well, Carolyn Maloney is supposed to be a lawmaker, right? You're a lawmaker, but we don't expect our lawmakers to write the law. Where does it go from? Who wrote it? Who came up with it? Now, when she was there in a FACA hearing and not knowing anything of what was going on, but claiming she was going to help, really, again, an airhead dingbat. That's really a good way to describe her. I'm sorry. I am sorry, but she's the one who passed this. I got to call it the way it is. She doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's told to do things. That's what it appears like from all the evidence. And then the thing that really sort of red pilled me on where our laws come from, and that is we have a government with the people, is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. When that came up, and then the claimed author of the bill, Elise Bean, who said, "Oh yeah, this is this law I made up." The learned academic, this academic, again, she got 15 things wrong about FACA in the climate of which it was passed under. And I concluded there's no way Elise Bean actually wrote that law. So who actually wrote that law? And the thing is, it's all done in secrecy. We don't know. We don't know. If I was to claim the CIA actually wrote these laws, there's no evidence to refute me because we actually don't know who passed these laws. But we do know they come from the government, because I just think about this. Like, this is the thing. It's like, what's the constituency out there? Okay, Carolyn Maloney, tell me, what's the constituency? If people in your district who said, Carolyn Maloney, I am just so upset that people that the government doesn't know the inside dealings of every limited liability entity formed in any state in this, this is really something we need, Carolyn Maloney. Will you represent us, Carolyn Maloney, and get this bill passed? This is what we need. The thing is, like, we know that didn't happen. We know that never happened. We know that never happened with FACA. We know that never happened with the FBAR. All these laws that come to punish us, they're never from a constituency. They're from some mysterious place we can't, really identify. And when we're told something about where it came from, story actually doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Department, Anthony. It's not a mysterious place. It might operate mysteriously, but it's clear. The stuff comes from the Treasury Department, right?
Yeah. Right.
At least in terms of the structuring, of the stuff, et cetera. But look, the basic,
right. So well, this is the thing. We have an unelected agency that becomes the top constituency. We have this. Hey, U.S. Treasury, guess what? You're not elected. Not one of you is elected there. You're appointed. You are an administrative head. Now that administrative head who's not elected gets to decide what laws get passed, because we're going to write them. We're going to put them there. We're not going to say who actually wrote them, and we're going to make them so complicated no one will read them. And we're just talking about Congress people who really are there for reasons, who knows what, right? They're not reading them. They don't understand it, but they're the ones, they're the actors, right? I mean, that's what it is. Carolyn Maloney's really an actor. She plays a lawmaker. She plays a lawmaker on TV, but she doesn't know how to make a law. She doesn't know what the laws are. She doesn't care what they are. And no one actually requires her to know. What she is there is a mouthpiece of U.S. Treasury. That's all she is.
Would you agree that if the legislative process and the way laws are passed takes place in a way that is, I think, absolutely invisible to 99% of American voters, would you say that's a democracy?
No.
I mean,
say that again. Wait, hold on. I'm thinking of it again. Say that again, John.
Well, okay. I mean, I'll try to reformulate. I mean, basically, so the question is this, right? Do you think that in a political jurisdiction where laws are made outside the view of the general public, in a way using language that cannot be understood by the general public? Let me give you an example. Every time there's an amendment to the Internal Revenue Code, it's a conforming amendment. They never tell anybody what it looks like after the amendment, right?
Yep.
Then introduced as part of an omnibus bill, so that elected representatives don't even know what they're voting for.
Yep.
Would you say that those are characteristics of a healthy democracy?
Well, I would just say, I get a little hung up on that word healthy democracy, because democracy isn't necessarily a good thing on its own. It just basically means mob rule.
Well,
But
let me change.
and this is, I think I know, but what I would say this,
Is it the will of the people? Do
right?
these
There's
laws-
zero. Yeah. And that's your point, John. I know that. I'm sorry, just to get that, but there's no representation. That's what it is. We're not, there is zero representation. You have zero representation in Congress. The people who have representation in Congress are those in administrative agencies. They get what they want. They get what they want to invade your privacy and to rule over you and for job security. They get it.
People who can buy the laws they want. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, if you look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, right? I mean, clearly corporate America, what have you. I mean, they were very much a part of the process.
They really were, right?
Subjected to the transition tax, right? And far more individuals were subjected to that and to guilty than these multinationals, right? So what we have is, anybody who doesn't have the money to, pony up, right? To play the game, okay, the great American legislative casino, right? Who can't get into the casino is completely disenfranchised. And one other point on this, like I find.
Well, the other thing too is when you're disenfranchised, you're just not disenfranchised, but no, now the law is going to punish you. It's not just like, I didn't get a say in the government. Not only did you not get a say, we're coming to get you.
I mean, one of the questions that one might ask is this. I mean, let's say, and there will be people, there's going to be drive-by shootings on this. Okay, just regular everyday people who haven't filed this thing for whatever reason. So you stand there in court and say, oh my God, I'm really sorry. I didn't know about this. But I mean, like, who can make laws like this? How can anybody even imagine that such a law could exist?
Well, here, John, I'm glad you mentioned this, because here's really a great quote that fits into this, right? Because here's from the judge's opinion here. So we were talking about exemptions and who, like, okay, so you're a small business, hey, maybe you have a rental home and an LLC, clearly for terrorism, clearly. The Corporate Transparency Act, talking about who has a seat at the table here, right? The Corporate Transparency Act exempts 24 kinds of entities from its reporting requirements, including banks, insurance companies, and entities with more than 20 employees, $5 million in gross revenue, and a physical office in the United States, right? As long as you're big, we know you can't be involved in terrorism, but if you're a tiny little person, well, then, presumptively, yeah, you're trying to launder money for terrorism. That's really what you're trying to do.
Anthony, you run this law firm. I understand. Okay. Now I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you, or have you ever been involved in running your law firm promote terrorist activities?
Well, he's not going to say yes.
well, I mean, it depends who defines it. I mean, and what, these agencies, these agencies would not be happy with, the truth. They're not happy with it. And they definitely want to stifle people, and they use their power to silence people.
My point is only that they're going after people where it's absolutely ridiculous. Okay. Yeah. It's absolutely preposterous. I mean, maybe IRS Medic is, does some things that government doesn't like, or does or doesn't, but there's nothing about IRS Medic that is remotely connected to the stated purposes of these laws.
Right. Nothing. No, nothing. And it's just true for every, for the vast majority. Well, and the other, this is really, in my mind, this is, I'm sorry, I'm a little paranoid after a few things that happened. Number one, when Lois Lerner was found to be, intentionally discriminating against conservative, she was a fall gal. I'm sure there was a whole bunch of people that she was a fall gal for protecting, and no one was ever punished. The other thing that really bugs me was the office, the OMB, Office of Management and Fiscal Policy, OMB. Their database was hacked back in 2016, I believe, and no one was punished whatsoever. And so I'm combining some ideas here. I was like, well, look, let's talk about the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. What does it require to do? It requires anyone who's a U.S. person to report their a whole host of financial assets to the U.S. government. Why does the U.S. government need this? Oh, they don't need it, and they don't even use the information for any legitimate purposes. But they did create a database of all this stuff. Now, well, I do know that people like to hack into information. So what the government is actually doing, it's creating a database that is a great little tool. Like imagine that you want to, let's just say that you're running a country that, has some perhaps potential issues with human rights. And perhaps someone leaves your country because you're trying to kill them. And perhaps they make the mistaken assumption believing the United States is the land of truth and justice. And so they come to the United States and they still have assets overseas. Well, now the U.S. government has that information of where their things are and their addresses as well. And now the United States government is free to share intentionally or free to share unintentionally by having a system that can be hacked so that scary people in this world can find out where people who are against this awful threats are, so they can harass, blow them up, go after their family members, all that stuff. That's where my mind goes. That's really where my mind goes on this. And it's only based on what I've seen the past 20 years develop as we've seen the government get information, not take care of the information, or just give it to people. And that's where we have a government that rules over people. And it's not even close to the other way around, not even close to the other way around. The people need to take control of the government, and we need to put them in their place. They have no power on their own. The power only comes from the people. Now, before we go, and I did want to get to this because, we see, that this is the FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. You have to file, and by the way, this is a criminal form, right? Because Financial Crimes Enforcement Network requires you to file a criminal form. So you're presumptively a criminal if you have a limited liability entity in anywhere. Now, we've seen this FinCEN get hammered on this. Now, where we haven't seen FinCEN get so hammered is when it comes to the report of foreign bank accounts, the FBAR. And so when I saw this, it's like, well, maybe there's some hope that another federal judge will take a look at the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 to say, wait a second, what's this all about? Where does Congress get the power to create where does Congress get the power to create a default presumption of criminal activity that can only be cured by filing a form and breaching trust, by breaching trust? And again, this has nothing to do with taxation. FBAR has nothing to do with taxation. But now that's what they're saying. Well, the FBAR helps us fight taxation. So the question I have, and this might be a little bit too much for today, is, I guess, John, if you can answer this briefly. I don't think so. We might go a little longer, but I'm sure it's worth it. Do you see any hope in this decision for a challenge on the Bank Secrecy Act FBAR filing requirement as claimed in the regulations?
No.
Nothing.
Zero.
Well, that was quick.
Well, you want
but here's the
go ahead,
thing.
Keith.
Yes, if you want.
I'm sorry. I hear what John says, no, and I agree with him. But how successful has the FBAR been? Because if you look at the last data that came out as far as the people who file an FBAR, whether they be overseas or in the United States, it's a minimal amount of individuals. So it's not this far sweeping thing. So what good is the FBAR when there is no robust participation in it?
Keith, you answered the question yourself.
Yeah.
Anthony, what's the only valuable FBAR?
An unfiled FBAR.
So there are probably millions of unfiled FBARs.
Oh yeah. Yep.
With Treasury drooling over the penalty base.
Oh my God, they're just excited. They're just they are absolutely excited. I don't know, John. I'm like, well, because this decision surprised me. Any victory we see actually surprises me. And you know what? That might be a separate podcast, and this would be a good place for me probably to tease this. I am looking for someone who's willing to debate me on this topic. And let me share
which topic?
The FBAR. That I have looked at and I have a 22-minute long video in which I lay out my case why there's absolutely no FBAR. The regulations say that the law mandates an FBAR be refiled, John and I have gone over this extensively. John has his own reasons why he doesn't think so. I have my own different reasons why I think we're both right. But I am looking for someone who's willing to come on the channel and take a look. And let me, you know what? Let me get let me get a copy of let me get the video where I lay out my case very clearly. 22 minutes. I lay out my case while there is no any legal justification for an FBAR. It is completely made up by the government who, and by the way, again, this government who makes up things like this. They make up things like this. They're claiming the government's like, oh yeah, well, this is just, it's still, this was only as applied to these plaintiffs in these cases, right? And that's just like kind of nonsense. Like, well, he claimed it all unconstitutional. So what you're saying is that that everyone has to bring their own case for it. So let me just pull up this FBAR penalties authorized by law. I'm going to share this in the chat. Okay, so anyone who really is a fan of the government, you think the FBAR is completely authorized by law, please watch this 22-minute video of mine. I lay out my case beautifully. Why there is no jurisdiction, and I try to come up with the government's best arguments. But if you are a supporter, I want to hear the best arguments because I want to counter them, because I don't think there's any. I think it is so beyond how the government has lied to create this FBAR requirement, and then the tax industry gloms on like yes, and it's the same thing that we've seen with the PFICs, right? The passive foreign investment companies, they're not there. There's no law that says a foreign mutual fund is a passive foreign investment company, but the tax industry is sort of taking this, and I've done it myself, just claim that they are. And so we see the same thing, and it's just, but no one's paying attention to the actual law. So here, I want to put up my email. If it's something that you're interested in debating, again, I put the link in the super chat. You could see that on replay. I think you could see that as replay. Email me here. I'd love to debate somebody on this, especially if you're from the government. I'd love to do that. I don't think you're going to be allowed to do that though. So email me at aparent@irsmedic.com. I think it's a fantastic thing. Again, 22 minutes. It's well laid out. I think one of my best arguments. I've been picking up a lot of subscribers on that one too. So please check that out if you do have the time. So I think that's sorry. So thanks for indulging me, fellows. Now,
by the way,
yeah.
I'd be happy to moderate that debate. I think we should set it up, and I'd be happy to moderate it. I mean, I think it'll be a very interesting discussion.
Right.
I mean, it would certainly force, a lawyer or other compliance person to actually read the legislation and think about it, which, not almost unheard of these days,
Yeah, we don't read it. And that's kind of the problem. Like most of the tax industry just reads the IRS, what the IRS's interpretation is. Right.
Well,
and that's that. And like this article here, this is what gets pushed around Twitter. The government's interpretation of what the case meant, not the judges, but the government's interpretation. So that's what we're always dealing with. We're always dealing with the government's interpretation of what the law is. And yeah, the government, I mean, they're pretty bold. They say 31 USC 5314 mandates a foreign bank account. And if you read that entire statute, in no way, shape, or form is that ever mentioned. It's not mentioned. An FBAR is not mentioned in the law. A report of foreign bank accounts isn't mentioned in the law. It's not there. They're inventing it. And that's why we've got to be careful and not let the administrative state, which they're doing, interpret what these, and that's the thing. These are laws no one actually wanted, but were voted for. And now on top of it, we're having the administrative state interpret these in a way that even though people who voted for it, who maybe didn't even know what they're doing, are changing into something else. So the lack of representation happens on it's like a two-stage process. We get laws we don't want, and then those laws are enforced in ways that contradict the law that we didn't want, but not in a way helpful to us, right?
I have a modest proposal on this that just occurred to me. If you're going to have these massive omnibus bills, I think that there ought to be a prohibition on including in an omnibus bill any new legislation that carries a penalty of incarceration.
What I think is that if you vote for a bill and you didn't read it, you need to be hanged by the neck until dead. That is treason. That is treason. You didn't read what you voted for. That's where I'm at. You're not representing. You are unconstitutional. And by the way, what I also think about is that when we have government entities acting, these people, these actors acting unconstitutionally, doing this, like you passed an unconstitutional law and you're enforcing this unconstitutional law. You know what? The remedy isn't just making this law go away. It's going after the people who did this. Why did you pass an unconstitutional law? Why did you not swear an oath? There needs to be consequences for people who do unconstitutional things other than here's your government retirement. No, you need to lose it. There needs to be consequences for acting unconstitutionally, of which there is none. There are none. There's the thing I was trying to ruin people with. Oh man, the court took that away from me. Oh well, let me just go find another way to ruin people. No, if you do that,
the view of the government and probably most Congress people, it is in fact their duty to pass unconstitutional laws unless they're caught, right?
There you go. And that's yep, we have
the whole thing is ridiculous. But listen, listeners, I don't know what you think about the discussion today, maybe too abstract or whatever, but I really think it comes down to, I think this can be understood so clearly in terms of President Reagan's 81 inaugural address, where he talks about, the difference between a government having a people versus, a people having a government versus the other way around. And that's really what this is all about.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in this at all, I really think that Reagan's inaugural address would be a great start, a great background to the debate that's going on right now. Because this, we can talk about the Corporate Transparency Act, sure. But what the judge's decision here is really about is, one, are there limitations on what the federal government can do? Two, what are the limitations? And three, is this particular Corporate Transparency Act in violation of that, right? In other words, they're not allowed to do it. And, I think that's a simple way to view this. And interestingly, as Anthony has pointed out a number of times, in the United States, there's incredible deference, right, to laws, to regulations. And the Supreme Court of the United States is due, I think, to hand down a decision before June.
Yeah.
On whether the rules should be just sort of blind adherence and a presumption of the validity of all of these horrible regulations. So, all this complaining about the U.S. Supreme Court, but it's done some good things for taxpayers in the last year. There's no question about that. And, this, I can't remember the name of the decision, but, the decision that's going to determine whether Chevron deference continues or not is going to be absolutely, one of the most far-reaching decisions probably ever handed down by the Supreme Court.
It could be one of the biggest cases because that would take the power away from the agencies to be basically the default lawmakers, and that's really what happens. And by default, lawmakers not only are they the ones creating laws, but they're creating the regulations, and then they'll interpret the law in their way, which oftentimes should the Supreme Court just rubber stamp agencies' interpretations of laws that they wrote, basically. And that's what has the potential to be overturned. And if it does, that would be one of the most devastating things for this government that rules over us. It would be one of the most devastating things that could possibly happen, that people, if representatives actually had to write laws, and if regulations had to be related to the law that was written and decided, I would say, the bulk of everything goes away. The bulk of all our regulations go away because our regulations are so divorced from, they're divorced from what the people want. They rule what the people who wish to rule over us want. And so that actually could be the biggest, we talked about how the Moore case could be the biggest constitutional case of all time. Within it's arguable, but the overturning of Chevron would be even bigger, I think, because it will impact mostly everything.
Yeah, Anthony, on that point again, coming back to Reagan's, are we a people who has a government or the other way around? This is exactly the same issue. right? Because, people elect Congress to make laws. They don't elect Congress to, have a bare bones law and then delegate, the rest of it, to the Treasury Secretary, who's unelected, right? Under some kind of broad regulatory authority, right? So, in a very real sense, I wonder to what extent there ought to be a presumption against the validity of regulations anyway, et cetera.
Wow. Yeah.
But that's another topic. But
You're right. That's a great point. You're right. It's like not only should you not get deference, you should get suspicion.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes
Yeah.
from Reagan's inaugural address.
Yeah.
And I seriously think people should watch. And I also highly, highly recommend the movie. I think it's called On the Basis of Sex: The Life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Where the theme that runs through it is, right, when courts look at things in terms of, is this part of the, the climate of the air or the weather of the day, right? I mean, this is extremely important. Anyway.
All right. Well, here, I know we got to wrap it up. I got to get to some things, and I just want to quickly, I think this is a great place to wrap it up. Got a comment here from Jack. He goes, seeing how you guys are bringing up that FBARs are BS, why don't you try suing the government to change it, help expats out of the U.S.? Well, here's the thing. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for that. Perhaps we can, but in order to do so, I need a client. I need someone who has been assessed FBAR penalties and is willing to sue the federal government for reversal of those penalties. And so for that, you go to irsmedic.com/offshore. If you are somebody who has been assessed an FBAR penalty and you think that the government needs to back off a little bit because they actually have no power, go here. And again, watch the video where I lay out my case in 22 minutes. Well, there is no FBAR law whatsoever. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. And if you are considering renouncing citizenship or maybe leaving the country, you just want some, if you're non-compliance with your taxing and FBAR obligations and you're not sure if entering would do more harm than help, great place to start was our friend Keith Fredman. He's a little quiet today as we're talking on this. Oftentimes he's a little bit more. You can reach out to him at US_overseas_advocate@outlook.com. And I think I have a link to his Facebook group. Actually, we are near, there we go. Go here. We're up to 10,000.
He got logged off. You need to let him back in. He has something to say.
Oh, he does? Okay. All right. Let's see here. Let him back in. Here he is. All right. And Keith says yes. You have something to say, Keith?
No, sorry about that. I just had a bad connection there. No. I have nothing to say.
All right.
We're good to go.
And if you are thinking about renouncing your citizenship because of the wonders of our government, our lords, you can reach out to our friend John Richardson. Citizenship Solutions. Here's his email, citizenshipsolutions@protonmail.com. So with that, we went a little bit over time today, but I mean, exciting news. And there's just a lot of changes going on. I got to tell you, and this is what I would say is, 10 years ago, it was really hard to find news. I had, running the podcast, like, okay, we're really looking for subjects to keep a track of. Now I can't keep on top of things. There's so many changes going on. Some helpful ones, some unhelpful, but there's a lot of things going on. So the best thing you could do is to make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you can be informed of all the important changes that are going on that really can affect you as we dissect what this government truly is and the way to bring it down. This is Anthony Parent for Iris Medic, for Keith Redmond and John Richardson. Thanks for watching.